Okay, everybody. So last class, we discussed the principles of laissez-faire capitalism. Um, in our coursework, I did notice a little bit of confusion on the term laissez-faire, so I want to briefly discuss that. But as capitalism develops and as the Industrial Revolution takes off, Adam Smith and the classical economists, they believe that a laissez-faire policy where the government leaves the economy alone is best because the laws of economics, the natural laws of economics, were really human nature, self-interest, competition, and then supply and demand. That market will do the best job of fixing the economic issues that are created, such as poverty, such as inequality, because the free market is going to work itself out. Socialism takes a different approach to solving these problems. Now, a little discussion here about these terms and what they mean in today's society. Number one, they are very loaded terms. They are politically charged, even today, and they are nuanced terms. So we're going to be learning about the basic principles of laissez-faire capitalism and the basic principles of socialist thought and communist thought. What happens, this is your introduction. What is going to happen with these ideas and these policies is complex, and it will take some study, and hopefully this will be a good introduction for you as we move forward. So I am not advocating any of these ideologies. My big deal, or what annoys me most, sometimes when I come across, even in modern politics, is in national news media, is when people don't understand what the words mean. So I'm going to lay out the ideologies. We're going to compare these ideologies to Smith and the classical economists, and we will go from there. All right. So socialism. And first off, about socialism and communism. Communism is one particular brand of socialism, and many would consider it the most extreme brand. What makes it important, communism, is that by the end of the 1800s, and certainly in the 20th century, the 1900s, communism will be the dominant form of socialism out there, and will become very politically important to understand in order to understand, the Second World War, the Cold War, and all the way up until modern China, for instance. Socialism and capitalism are not necessarily opposites. Communism and laissez-faire capitalism are definitely opposites, but they can combine together in some fairly complex ways, as you'll see if you look around to the modern economies around the world today. All right, but let's get into the basics. What is socialism? And afterwards, we'll talk about what communism is and how that what its particular specific characteristics are. All right, this slide did not work. This is what I was trying to fix before our class today. Anyway, socialism has its, get this over here, has its roots in the French Revolution. Remember, the Industrial Revolution and the French Revolution are both disrupting European society at around the same time, late 1700s, early 1800s. And as we studied the French Revolution earlier, we learned about the principles that it stood for: liberty, equality, and fraternity. And then as we saw the drama of the French Revolution unfold, we kind of explored just kind of how complex those ideals are. What is equality? What is liberty? And what happens when one person's equality butts up against someone else's equality? And in economics, remember, the people were very hungry during the French Revolution. People were struggling to get by during the French Revolution. And so in the first phase, the moderate phase, the upper class bourgeoisie phase of the French Revolution, they saw liberty and equality as everybody being able to own their own property and do with it what they want, kind of a capitalist, laissez-faire capitalist kind of view. The radical revolution will attempt to solve these problems of equality in a different way. Now, in the French Revolution, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the great Enlightenment thinker, was very influential. And Rousseau's influence on the radical revolution goes as far as to say, inequality is one of the biggest problems society has. So it's not just allowing people to use their property as they want. If you have rich and you have poor, that's causing a really, really big problem. So you have to actively intervene in order to help the poor out. That's at least not what necessarily Rousseau was saying, but that's what the radicals take it to do. And so during the French Revolution, during the radical phase, there will be efforts to set prices, to set wages. They'll go to bakers and they'll say, hey, you got flour, you have to sell it, and you're going to sell it for this price because people are starving, they need food, you have it, you have to sell it. Well, that's not laissez-faire. That's not leaving the economy alone. When you're intervening in the economy and telling people what to do with their property, what to sell it for, and what price to sell it for, now the government is managing the economy. And that's a principle that you'll see a lot in socialist thought. There was a very influential radical thinker, Babeuf, from the French Revolution, who saw a war between classes developing, between capital, or the owners of capital, and labor. This idea will be used later by Marx, as we'll see. All right, so the French Revolution is where socialist thought begins. But as the French Napoleon comes and goes, and the Industrial Revolution is taking off in Western Europe, again, there are severe disruptions to society. There are severe problems: child labor, urbanization, pollution, extreme poverty. I always go back to the statistic in Manchester. In the 1820s, the average life expectancy of a working male was 17 years old. That's hard to live with. And the laissez-faire classical economists will say, the free market will fix this. The free market, if you disrupt the free market, this is like Malthus and Ricardo's point. If the government involves itself in the free market, you might fix one problem, but you're going to cause other larger problems in the grand scale. Well, socialists don't necessarily accept this. Socialists will look at the inequality and the problems caused by the Industrial Revolution. They say, there's got to be a better way to do this. There's got to be a better way that we can improve these conditions. And this starts, now what's important to remember is that socialism isn't like one thing. There are several different socialist ideas out there. And what we're going to largely talk about is what they have in common. First one, gentleman that you'll need to know is Robert Owen. He's not a philosopher. He was a factory owner in England, and later he'll go to the United States. And he saw an opportunity to, he saw that he could potentially create a factory that not only made a profit, but also took care of its workers. And so he tried to create more of an ideal community. He built living quarters for the workers. He paid workers a higher wage than they would otherwise receive in other parts of the economy. And this community called New Harmonies showed that you could, on a small scale at least, take care of workers, improve their living conditions, and produce a profitable factory. We often associate him with what are called the Utopian Socialists. These socialists, at least the ones that you're going to need to know in your book, Charles Fourier and Saint-Simon, again, they're philosophers with their own unique kind of perspective. But what they have in common is that they believe that competition doesn't lead to progress. It leads to inequity, which is a really big problem. And that cooperation is a better way of approaching economic decisions. That competition is going to lead to haves and have-nots, and that's a big problem. So whichever utopian socialist you're talking about, Fourier, Saint-Simon, Robert Owen, what is central to it is that the government plays a role in managing the economy. Now, to what degree do they own it? To what degree do they manage it? That varies between socialist thought. So laissez-faire, government stays out of the economy. That's laissez-faire capitalism, that's classical economics. Socialist thought is the government should be involved managing the economy. And most utopian socialists thought about some kind of restructuring of society. Now remember, in Europe in the 1800s, you're still living in, the aftermath of the old regime, a landed aristocracy, a lot of poor peasants and urban workers, and then a small but growing, middle class that we call the bourgeoisie during the French Revolution. Those classes all wanted different things during the French Revolution. They're fighting for those changes. Utopian socialists generally thought that some sort of different approach to organizing society needed to happen. But the most influential socialist idea of the early 1800s comes from the Communist Manifesto, written by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels in 1848. This document is very influential in world history. However, it will not be influential until the late 1860s for reasons that we can talk about in the AP course if you take it. Communism is a specific brand of socialism that is going to be taken up by the Soviet Union in Russia starting in 1917 and in China. I think what you find once you look at those systems is what they do is not exactly what Marx was advocating for. But Marx and Engels were historians and they were philosophers, and these ideas are, pretty powerful. Karl Marx was very influenced by a romantic historian named Hegel, who interpreted history as a series of warring groups or warring classes. And so Marx saw the previous 400 years, from like 1400 to 1800, the course that we've studied. He saw that as a process of the bourgeoisie, the middle class, rising up and challenging the old landed aristocracy and overthrowing them. And that's what he saw the French Revolution as. And in many ways, he was right. What he predicted was that as society moves forward in this industrial revolution, which was a more profound revolution, I shouldn't use that word, well, a more profound change than history had seen in quite some time, that two new classes were going to be warring. Now the bourgeoisie was not overthrowing the aristocracy. A new class was emerging of workers, which he called the proletariat, were rising up to overthrow now the bourgeoisie. Marx thought that if you just capitalism left alone, he didn't say that like you had to do anything, but left alone, laissez-faire policies were going to lead to a very small, rich, powerful class of owners and a very big group of workers who were going to be the have-nots, who were going to be very, very poor. And eventually this system will be so divided and so unstable that the workers will rise up and overthrow the owners in a communist revolution. Afterwards, Marx predicts, the workers then will seize the factors of production, the factories, the coal mines, the ships, and then they will share that equally in a communist utopia that he called a dictatorship of the proletariat or a dictatorship of the workers would emerge. Okay? So to review, socialism differs from capitalism because it is a managed system over a free market system. Communism is a particular brand of socialism that predicts A, class war, B, revolution, and C, a utopia to emerge afterwards. Now, I'll be the first to admit this is just scratching the surface. At this point, I want you to know the basic difference between laissez-faire capitalism, the basic difference between socialism, and the basic difference between communism. Hopefully, as this year unfolds, we'll get a chance to have a more nuanced discussion about how these ideas influence politics and society up into and including our current presidential election. Bernie Sanders is a self-described democratic socialist, and we can talk about what that means. We can talk about, the modern U.S. economy. Anyway, those discussions to come. For today, you have